Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, welcome to this lecture series of BSc with Chemistry, discipline specific elective of quantum chemistry, spectroscopy and photochemistry. In this lecture, we will be discussing electronic spectroscopy. Now friends, we have seen earlier the rotational spectroscopy, vibrational spectroscopy or IR spectroscopy. Then we have seen the Raman spectroscopy, and now we will see the electronic spectroscopy. Now in this electronic spectroscopy, basically we see the transition between two electronic states. So whenever a molecule absorbs the energy in the UV or visible range, it gains the sufficient amount of energy that apart from rotational and vibrational, it get the transition from one electronic state to the other electronic state. And therefore, this electronic spectroscopy is that way very important in analyzing much of the aspects of the molecular spectroscopy. So whenever an atom absorbs the radiation in UV or visible region, the only possible transition is electronic transition. And basically each of these transition is accompanied by the absorption of radiation of a particular energy. Now, when atoms absorb this energy, say we are talking about say E is equal to hc upon lambda kind of expression we talk about energy for, and when we talk about the atomic absorption, a sharp single absorption line is obtained in the spectrum, and each of such transition gives a single line, and hence many a times the atomic spectrum is also called as line spectrum. However, things are not so simple in case of the molecule. Whenever a molecule possesses or this molecule absorbs the energy, we get the band spectrum. Now, if you see, the molecule possesses four different types of energies. We have seen the translational energy, rotational energy, vibration energy, and electronic energy. And also, according to Born-Oppenheimer approximation, we see that the total energy of the molecule is given by sum of all these energies. You can see here, total energy is sum of translational, rotational, vibrational, and electronic. But according to Born-Oppenheimer approximation, this translation energy is much smaller, and therefore actually the total energy is given by this rotational energy plus vibrational energy plus electronic energy. And also the order of these energies are, the translation energy will be much smaller than the rotational will be much smaller than vibrational, and the electronic state energies will be higher than all of them. You can see in this figure, these smaller lines in between two vibrational states are representing the rotational levels. Then these V is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3 are vibration levels, and then these are the electronic level 1 and 2. Correct. So the frequency for electronic transition basically which is known as the Bohr frequency will be of this type, E upon hc. Correct. And whenever a sufficient energy is supplied to a molecule, such molecule they undergo the electronic excitation, and the electronic excitation usually are accompanied by the vibrational as well as rotational excitation. As a result, the molecular spectrum consists of very closely packed lines, or usually we get a band, and hence the molecular spectrum is also called as band spectrum. Now the electronic band spectra of molecule are generally they are very complex, and they are investigated with the considerable difficulties. They are observed in UV and visible region of the electromagnetic spectrum. And usually the complexity of this electronic spectra is most of the time it is due to the fact that the transition between two electronic state is almost invariably accompanied by the simultaneous transition between vibrational and rotational energy levels, isn't it? And therefore we will now see the important aspect of this electronic spectroscopy. Let us see one of the very important principle, that is Frank-Condon principle in this electronic spectroscopy. So the Frank-Condon principle is one of the most important part of this electronic spectroscopy, since in electronic transitions, basically all the electronic transitions they are accompanied by vibrational transitions, and large number of transitions are possible in it. However, Frank-Condon principle has actually given some simple qualitative rule for the most probable transitions. Now, according to this principle, the molecular electronic state is denoted by the potential energy curve. You can see here, this is potential energy curve, isn't it? And further, if you try to see in excited state, the bonding is quite weaker, and so the internuclear distance is larger than the ground state. If you try to see here, this is ground state, this is electronic state. Now, see, basically, when we study this electronic spectra, there are three possibilities. When UV or visible light absorption takes place in a molecule, there are basically three things. In the ground state, if you see the bond length is in this range at vibrational levels, like here, they can be shown like this. Okay. Now, as the molecule absorbs energy, there are now three possibilities. Let us try to spell out all the three possibilities. In the higher state, there are three possibilities that the bond length will be shorter than the ground state. This is one. The bond length will be exactly equal in the higher electronic state, and the next possibility is bond length is little extended in the higher energy state. However, if you try to see the first possibility, wherein the bond length is lesser than the bond length which are available at the ground state energy, ground state electronic state, is actually forbidden, because after absorbing energy, it is quite contradictory to say that the bond length, that is the vibrational, are lesser even after absorbing the energy. And therefore it is actually customary, or it is actually as per our experience, that the molecular bond length are increasing, or little more vibrations, excited vibrations, will be observed at the excited state. Now, therefore, we usually say that in excited state, the bonding is quite weaker, and because the motions are, say, more wider in the excited state, and therefore the internuclear distance is larger in than the ground state in the excited state. You can see here the internuclear distance on this x-axis. The internuclear distances are plotted, and therefore, if you see the excited electronic state, the internuclear distances are little more higher than the ground state energy levels. Okay, and therefore the potential energy curve shifts little bit right side to the excited right side to the as compared to the ground state, and therefore we can actually see what is the transition which is taking place from the ground electronic state to excited electronic state. The other factor is also we can notice that the dissociation energy will be smaller in excited state, isn't it? Because energy is more, and they are little bit, bonds are little bit weaker, and therefore the Frank-Condon principle has given a very simple statement. And what does it say? It says that the electronic transition takes place so rapidly that the vibrating molecule does not alter in its internuclear distance during the electronic transition. So basically, we can see that here what the Frank-Condon principle says is that way, according to the fact that the electronic transition takes place so fast or so rapidly that the vibrating molecule does not alter in its internuclear distance during the electronic transition. Now, due to this, basically, it is possible for us to show the electronic transition by literally the straight line, because it is so fast. and this straight line is basically parallel to this energy, and one can actually locate the probable vibrational state for a molecule in the excited state. From here, actually where it is going, say from V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 1, or V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 2, we can predict basically, because it is exactly parallel to this energy state, and exactly vertical line we can plot from this ground state energy to excited state energy. Now it is quite obvious that the electronic transition will be much faster, because the mass of electron is negligibly smaller. Oppenheimer approximation is already there, and because this mass of electron is negligibly small than that of the bonded atoms, and therefore this transition is very fast. This is quite obvious, and hence basically the atom take much more time for vibration as compared to the electronic transition. Also, as we know that the transition from V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 2 has the maximum probability from this figure we know, and therefore the peak corresponding to this transition has the maximum intensity, and the intensity goes on decreasing on either side, this side also and the higher side also. So we can see here, so the intensity goes on decreasing on either side, say from V is equal to 0 to 0, or V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 1, V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 2 has the maximum intensity, whereas on this side also and this side also it goes on decreasing, and which clearly means that the transition to the other vibrational levels, they occur with the lower probabilities, so that the relative intensities are smaller, which we observe, than the intensity of this particular state, that's from 0, 0 V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 2 of the electronic state. Similarly, the case that we have already talked about is the intensity or the energy state, bond length state of the higher excited electronic state will remain same. So if the upper electronic state has the same equilibrium internuclear distance as that of the lower state, so the if we talk in terms of the Frank-Condon principle, the transition would take place from V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 0 in the excited state, and this will be the strongest spectral line. And if you see here, so the strongest peak will be from V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 0, that is 0 0 peak, isn't it? So when we read it as 0 0 from higher to lower state, and where this if the upper state transition is drastically greater, there will be actually the greater possibility of having this if the transition takes place from V is equal to 0 to V is equal to 0, the higher state. Apart from that, if we see for molecular orbital theory, according to molecular orbital theory, the atomic orbitals, they combine to form the molecular orbital, isn't it? Now, from this aspect of electron spectroscopy, the molecular orbital forms biaxial overlap of the atomic orbital, and they are called as sigma bonds, correct? We can see here sigma bonds formation. Now, the molecular orbital which are formed by the lateral overlap, they are called as pi molecular orbital. So the two atomic orbitals, when they mix to give the two molecular orbitals, they are basically called as the bonding and antibonding molecular orbitals, correct? So the antibonding orbitals are represented by an asterisk. So sigma antibonding orbital and then pi antibonding orbital. That is, the molecular orbitals, they are represented by, say, sigma, sigma star, pi and pi star. Also, from this particular part, we can see that there are non-bonding orbitals which are usually represented by n. Okay. Now, why we need to understand this? Because we are going to consider this part in studying the electronic spectroscopy further, for the further details of the subject matter, and therefore it is very necessary to see the molecular orbital approach, wherein how this symmetry or unsymmetry part they follow the path. So basically the molecular orbital which has a center of inversion, they are called as centrosymmetric, that we already know. But just to revise, we have introduced these terms over here. And we already know that the G, that is G-red, meaning even, and the molecular orbital having no center of inversion, they are called as non-centrosymmetric, and they are usually represented by U. So this subscript to this sigma and pi bonds, that is G represents the G-red case, and U represents the un-G-red, that is meaning uneven case. So it can be seen here that the sigma and pi star, that is this and this molecular orbitals, have the center of inversion. If you can see, isn't it, they have the center of inversion, and so they are represented as sigma G and pi star G, G-red. G stands for G-red. On the contrary, if you look at this sigma star and pi, you will see that there are no center of inversion, and therefore they are represented as sigma star U and pi U. Okay. So let us have a look at the selection rule for the electronic spectra. In case of selection rule for electronic spectra, what we need to see is, we see that the electronic transition takes place if the parity of molecular orbital is changed. That is, the transition takes place from centrosymmetric to non-centrosymmetric orbital and vice versa. What I mean to say is that these transitions are allowed if it takes place from G to U or U to G, that is G-red to un-G-red or un-G-red to G-red molecular orbital. And basically G-red to G-red or un-G-red to un-G-red, they are forbidden transitions. Secondly, the second selection rule is the electronic transition is allowed between two states having same multiplicity. That is, the transition from singlet to singlet state and triplet to triplet state are allowed, but from singlet to triplet state and vice versa are forbidden. And the next selection rule is that the transition in which the Z component of orbital angular momentum, that is vertical, that is LZ component, changes by plus minus 1 are allowed, while those transitions in which it changes by plus minus 2 are forbidden. This is as usual. This is nothing new in it. Apart from that, if you try to see the types of electronic transition, there can be different molecular orbitals which are having different energies, and in that the order of energy of molecular orbital will be given by this, that is sigma G is lesser than this, pi U is lesser than non-bonding, is lesser than anti-bonding, G-red is lesser than anti-bonding un-G-red. So when the selection rules are applied for, say, various possible electronic transitions, there are only 4 electronic transitions or 4 electronic transitions which can be allowed, and they are basically shown over here. So if you look at this sigma to sigma star transition, this transition basically takes place in molecules which contains only sigma bonds. If you see here, such examples are in case of, say, saturated hydrocarbons. They do not have other orbitals, and so the other types of transitions are not possible in this case. And this is the highest energy transition occurring at about, say, 125 to 135 nanometers. So this absorption takes place in far UV or vacuum UV region, and so it has not much application. Say if you try to see the examples like methane or ethane, it can be seen. The second example is non-bonding to sigma star transition. In this case, if you see non-bonding to sigma star transition, in this case, basically it takes place in saturated molecules which contains only sigma bonds and heteroatoms such as oxygen or nitrogen. And the heteroatom which contains non-bonding orbital, which contains electrons to undergo excitation, and the absorption takes place at about, say, 180 to 200 nanometers. The examples for this category are methanol, methyl chloride, ethers, etc. The next is pi to pi star. These kind of transitions. These transitions, they basically take place in unsaturated molecules containing, say, pi molecular orbitals. And the transition energy corresponds to, say, around 170 to 190 nanometers. The examples of these categories are alkenes or benzenes, etc. The next category is non-bonding to pi star transition. And this transition takes place in unsaturated molecules containing heteroatoms. They are basically of low energy transition and are very sensitive to solvents. If you say acidic solvent, example, if you take the acid, if you see the acidic solvent protonate, the non-bonded electrons, and so on, the signal basically disappears in acidic solvents. If you take the example of this kind of non-bonding to pi star transition, you can see, say, the example of carbonyl cyano compounds and so on. Now, let us understand the another important aspect in the electron spectroscopy. That is the spin multiplicity and spin states. This is very important in understanding the electron spectroscopy. Now, in spin multiplicity or spin state, basically the multiplicity is given by the m is equal to 2s plus 1, wherein we know that this s is the total spin quantum number. Now, if the multiplicity is 1, it is called as the singlet state, and if multiplicity is 2, it is called as the doublet state, and so on. This analogy we go on continuing. Now let us have an interesting understanding from this. Now in ground state, herein if you see here, all the electrons in molecules are paired, and so the total spin of molecule, that is s is equal to 0. So if I substitute this s is equal to 0 here, I get the multiplicity is equal to 1, and therefore it is called as the singlet ground state, and it is represented as S0. Whereas when electron excites to the higher energy level, from this to this, basically there are two cases now. While going this electron from this level to this level, it may retain its state or it may change its spin. It may be like this only, or it may reverse the spin. So if the spin is same as that of the ground state, the total spin remains s is equal to 0 and the multiplicity will be 1, and it is called as the singlet excited state, and it will be represented as S1. Now if the electron changes its spin, and while going from ground state to upper state, if it changes its spin, that is from minus half to plus half, so what will happen? My S will become equal to 1, and therefore we can get the multiplicity as equivalent to 3, and it is called as, therefore it is called as the triplet excited state, and it is represented as T1. Now it has been observed that the energy of this triplet state is lower than that of the singlet state while plotting with in the energy profile. Now it is therefore interesting to see that this triplet state is more stable than the singlet state, and also the first, second, third singlet states are there, they are represented as S1, S2, S3, etc., while similarly the case will be of the triplet states that will be represented by T1, T2, T3, and so on likewise. Let us try to understand the very important aspect of the electron spectroscopy through Jablonski diagram. This diagram represented over here is known as Jablonski diagram, and we have already seen basically that earlier that the light absorbed by the system is used up in bringing up the photochemical reaction, but majority of the time the absorbed light may not necessarily bring about the photochemical reaction, but it may also lead to various other phenomena which are very interesting to see. What are these phenomena? So these various phenomena shown by the excited molecule are represented by this particular kind of diagram, which is known as the Jablonski diagram. Now if you see in this Jablonski diagram, the molecule will absorb the energy from the singlet ground state and in UV and visible region, and it will be excited to this singlet excited state. from S1, S2, S3 and so on. And after excitation, the molecule will return back to the ground state. And while returning, the various mechanism will occur. So we have tried to summarize over here. So these transition can be of two types. Now, non-radiative transitions and radiative transitions. And in non-radiative transitions, say we can have the internal conversion or inter-system crossing kind of transitions. And in radiative transitions, we can have fluorescence and phosphorescence phenomena, which are very interesting phenomena. Let us see the non-radiative transition. What are non-radiative transitions? Now, whenever the transitions which are usually not, they do not lead to emission of light radiation, they are called as non-radiative transitions, as their name indicates. It can be of two types again, as we are seeing here, that the internal conversion and inter-system crossing. So first is internal conversion. So if the molecule loses some of its energy in the form of heat from the say higher singlet state to lower singlet state, that is from S3 to S2 or S2 to S1, it is called as the internal conversion. And this phenomena occurs in less than about 10 to the power minus 11 seconds. And since the energy is released in the form of heat, it is called as non-radiative or radiation-less transition. Now, secondly, it may happen that if the energy is released in the form of heat and the molecule changes its spin from the singlet state to triplet state, and it also changes the spin states from or this spin multiplicity, the process is called as inter-system crossing, that is ISC. Now, in this case, what happens? The molecule comes from S2 to T2 or S3 to T3 or S1 to T1, basically. Basically, these states are spectroscopically forbidden and therefore they occur at very slow rates. The other part is radiative transitions. That means they show radiations. So the transitions which leads to emission of light radiations are called as radiative transitions, and they are basically classified into fluorescence and phosphorescence. Now, if the molecule comes to ground state from the first excited singlet state, that is from S1 to S0, from this particular state to this particular state, it will lead to emission of radiation which is called as fluorescence. And this transition is spectroscopically allowed, and therefore it occurs at about say 10 to the power minus 8 seconds. And apart from that, the other part is phosphorescence. So if the molecule comes to ground state from the first excited triplet state, that is from this T1 to S0, it leads to the emission of radiation and it is called as phosphorescence, basically. So this transition is spectroscopically forbidden. And since the transition involves the inversion of spin, it takes relatively longer time, say of the order of 10 to the power minus 3 seconds. Now, both the fluorescence as well as phosphorescence, they occur at lower frequency as compared to the excitation frequency. The reason is because the energy is lost in form of some heat in non-radiative transitions. And therefore, they occur at little bit lower frequency. Apart from this, there is another part which is of chemical reaction, which is obviously not mentioned over here. But then one needs to know that what are these chemical reactions involved into it. So in some cases, none of the above transition takes place after the excitation. However, the molecule undergoes chemical reaction, which is called as the photochemical reaction. And now, since the singlet state returns quickly back to the ground state, the probability of photochemical reaction is more in triplet state than the singlet state. And hence, most of the photochemical reaction occurs through triplet excited state from this particular state. Let us see here these phenomena in detail. So your luminescence spectroscopy, it leads to these particular paths: fluorescence, phosphorescence, and chemiluminescence. They are very interesting phenomena. We have tried to show here from the pictures which we have taken from some source. So in fluorescence, basically, when a beam of radiation is incident on a certain substance, they emit the visible radiation instantaneously. And this phenomena is basically known as fluorescence. It is basically observed in the molecular transition, say from the first singlet excited state to the ground state. And this phenomena basically shows very peculiar properties. Like this phenomena is instantaneous and starts immediately after the absorption of light. Apart from that, the different substances fluorescence light of different wavelength is another peculiar property. Apart from that, the extent of fluorescence depends upon the nature of solvent and the presence of certain anions in the solution. Also, fluorescence is exhibited by liquids as well as solids. And apart from that, as soon as the incident radiation is cut off, the fluorescence is stopped. You cannot see it anymore. You can have the various examples of fluorescence, that is, you can have the solution of chlorophyll as shown in red color fluorescence when illuminated in presence of oxygen, or you can have teeth, hairs, skins, etc. to show fluorescence with the blue light, or you can find the helmets of the firefighters to have a fluorescent color, or the workers, those are working on the railway lines, they can have the jackets of the fluorescent colors. So fluorescence shows the intense green fluorescence in the dilute alkali solutions. They can be used for various purposes. There are various applications of this fluorescence phenomena. The difference in the fluorescence caused by UV rays in different type of inks, which enables to detect the forged document. It can be in the forensic application. Also, the ringworm may be detected in the fluorescence caused by the UV radiation. Also, the fluorescence of the phosphorus is being used in the fluorescent lamp. Use of this fluorescence phenomena may be made to detect the presence of invisible radiation like UV rays. Apart from that, there are several other uses of fluorescence. If you try to look for this phosphorescence, the phosphorescence is a phenomena when a beam of light radiation is incident on a certain substance. They emit the light continuously even after the incident light is cut off. Like this picture, if you see, this image is moving, but then still the background phenomena is there. So this phenomena of delayed fluorescence is called as phosphorescence. So the substance which exhibits the phenomena are called as phosphorescent substances, and this phenomena occurs when the transition takes place from the first excited triplet state, that is T1, to ground state S0 that we have seen just now. And this phenomena has very peculiar property, as in case of fluorescence, that the phenomena is caused cheaply or this phenomena is majorly caused by the ultraviolet and violet radiations. This phenomena is mainly shown by the solids. Apart from that, the magnetic and dielectric properties of the phosphorescent substance are different before and after the illumination, and this is basically due to the change in the spin of the electron. And also the time for which the light is emitted for the phosphorescent substance depends upon the nature of substance and sometimes on the temperature change through which it is undergoing changes. Apart from that, the phosphorescence continues even after the incident radiation is cut off. That is what is seen over here in this picture. There can be several examples of this phosphorescence phenomena, like sulfides in zinc alkali and alkaline earth metals. They exhibit this phenomena. Many dyes, when fixed by the suitable method, they show phosphorescence. The minerals, ruby, emerald, all of them, they show phosphorescence. There can be several applications of this phosphorescence phenomena. Luminous paints, they contain about 2 to 5% of alkali chlorides and traces of heavy metals, sulfides. Such a mixture is generally used in painting, watch dials, electric switches, road signals, then winding road indicators, firefighter helmets, alarming places. At all such places, the phenomena can be expressed. The chemiluminescence is another important aspect, wherein certain chemical reactions, they are basically results in the formation of the products, say for example, which are in electronically excited state. So when these excited modules or these excited molecules, they return to the ground state, they emit extra energy in the form of visible light, and these visible radiations, they follow the mechanism as shown over here. So the phenomena of emission of visible light in a chemical reaction is basically known as chemiluminescence. If we try to see the example, is when alkali metal vapors, they react with the halogens or with the mercury halides. The chemiluminescence occurs with the basically which consists of the spectrum of alkali metals. So the examples can be sodium lamp or mercury lamps. So if you consider the reaction of metallic sodium with the chlorine, So sodium metal contains the monoatomic and diatomic molecules. And if you try to see the mechanism as shown over here, so it is basically like of this pattern, isn't it? So if you see ultimately the yellow spectrum with this particular emission. So the sodium vapor lamp and the mercury vapor lamps, they are used to illuminate the streets in the form of street lights. And they are very common examples of chemiluminescence. This is the very excellent use of electronic spectroscopy. Now, let us come to very important aspect in electronic spectroscopy, that is dissociation. Now, what is dissociation is very important aspect. Herein, if you see here in this particular diagram, if the electronic transition is from the bonding orbital to anti-bonding orbital, the bond gets weakened, as we know, because the length will increase. And as a result, the bond length increases and the energy minimum becomes shallow. That is what is the ultimate result of it. As a result, a few of the normal transitions may be observed, basically. And this will be followed by the continuum. Now, this helps us to understand or learn how the spectrum can be used to determine the dissociation energies of both the ground state and excited states. So the dissociation energy is the smallest energy that is required to break a bond. Okay. Whereas if you see the pure vibrational spectra, it yields the inaccurate values of the dissociation energy if you try to get it from the vibration spectra. So if you look at this particular figure, the ground and excited states potential energies are represented as the Moore's potential energy curves, isn't it? Yahan par, if you see, this is ground state, electronic state, this is excited electronic state. And we can see here that the potential energies across this y axis, the point on this y axis is on the onset of the dissociation, which is crossing this particular continuum, isn't it? And therefore you can see here it is beyond this bonding distances. So the energy of the excited state plus the energy of the 0-0 transition, that is this, correct? You see, so this is the additional energy. Okay, this energy plus this energy, that gives you the energy of the pure electronic transition in such cases. More often, the dissociation limit is not reached until this point is reached. But in this case, the number of vibronic transitions, they are observed. And therefore, in such cases too, the dissociation energies can still be extracted. What I mean to say is the separation between the adjacent line of the anharmonic oscillator decreases with the increasing vibrational quantum number until it finally becomes zero when the dissociation sets in at this particular point. So the use of the energy expression of this particular pattern, that is equation number 5 for anharmonic oscillator, leads to this particular equation number 6. So this is the equation of straight line. This is particularly the equation of straight line. If you try to see, if you plot this as y and this as x, we get this as slope and this as intercept. So we should be obtained the plot like this, and the slope of this particular graph will be given by this particular part and the intercept will be this particular part, and this particular plot is known as Birch-Sponner plot. And the extrapolation of this Birch-Sponner plot on the x-axis yields to your nu max plus 1, that is plus 1 additional state. So this maximum frequency or the maximum vibrational quantum number for the upper electronic state, from which the continuum limit can be obtained using the value of this omega E. The dissociation energy can be calculated using this particular equation. So ultimately, what we have seen here is a molecule absorb the energy in UV or visible region to such an extent that it crosses this bonding continuum and leads to the further breakage or cleavage of the bond. This is what is the phenomena of dissociation in electronic spectroscopy. Whereas if you try to see the another important aspect in electronic spectroscopy is pre-dissociation. Now what is pre-dissociation? If you look at this figure, it will be very easy to understand. Now in some cases, every transition leads to dissociation when the excited state is unbound. Say for example, if you look at this particular state. Apart from that, in some cases it is observed that the transition starts off very normally and it follows a continuum, and then the normal pattern is resumed like this particular state. So this is due to the phenomena which is known as pre-dissociation or the relaxation kind of phenomena. Basically, the pre-dissociation is the relaxation phenomena. Basically, it is a relaxation to a state with the enough energy to break a bond. It actually arises when two electronic states cross, or usually one of the electronic state is stable and has a well-defined potential energy diagram, and the other state is a typically repulsive state, and this transition is initially to the stable state and then transfers across to the repulsive state where the dissociation occurs. You can actually see over here. So the potential energy curve of the excited state may cross with an unstable state. If you see over here, may cross the unstable state where the molecule crosses over the unstable electronic state and the dissociation occurs. And apart from this, the region which is above this crossover point, the normal transitions, they can be resumed. And therefore, in conclusion, we can say here that the dissociation energies of excited state molecule can be obtained by Wigner-Spooner plot, and the ground state dissociation energies can be obtained if the excitation energies of the atoms are known. More or less, in certain cases, the phenomena is known as pre-dissociation are observed, and this happens when there is a crossing of potential energy curves in the excited state. That is what is the example which we have seen over here. Now this can be explained based on the further model of the particular molecular orbital theories. So if you try to see the theories of pi to pi transitions, they are very interesting. So several theories were proposed in the previous century basically, and they are theoretically true to explain the observed phenomena with regards to say pi to pi star transitions, which we have earlier in section we have seen also the Huckel molecular orbital theory, the overview of this theory, and these simple theories are this HMO, one of them, and the other one is free electron model theory. Now in HMO or Huckel molecular orbital method, we lend to easy computation because the pi orbitals are higher in energy than the sigma orbitals, and which are more tightly held to the nucleus basically, and the pi electrons are held responsible for the reactivity of the molecule that we all know, and hence we consider only the pi framework while considering the unsaturated system. So let us begin with this free electron model. So in this free electron model, if you see, the analogy is very simple that way. We all know the free electron model is based on the model of the particle in one-dimensional box that we have seen in this particular lecture series in our earlier lectures. So briefly, basically this problem is an electron which is assumed to be trapped in the one-dimensional box of say length L, and the quantum mechanical solution gives the wave function psi of this particular form after normalization and with the corresponding energy, that is En, n square h square upon 8 ml square, isn't it? This is what is the origin point for the principal quantum number, as we have seen in quantum chemistry. Now, if we consider the simplest molecule, ethylene, herein, your each carbon atom is sp2 hybridized, correct? Which involves, say, sigma or s, py and pz orbitals, and they form 3 bonds in the molecular plane. You can see over here, correct? Now this constitutes the sigma framework. This leaves the 2px orbital containing a single electron on the each carbon. This is very observable fact. So the two orbitals can overlap to form the pi and a pi star orbitals, bonding and antibonding. So now let us extend the pi system by adding 2 more carbon in conjugation. So we can go on adding the conjugation into it. Say, take the example of butadiene, correct? So this is a polyene. So this polyene having alternate double bond and the single bond, we can go on adding chains, of course, in it, and this process can be continued as long as you can add. So each of the carbon in conjugation will contribute an electron to the pi electron system, and in molecular orbital method, these electrons, they do not belong to the atom from which they actually originate, but we all know they belong to the molecule as a whole because they are delocalized, and therefore we may think of them as delocalized over the entire molecule. You can see here, okay? And the conservation of orbital requires that if suppose we have n atom polyene, it will give rise to the n molecular orbitals. Out of that n molecular orbitals, if you see over here, exactly n by 2 should be occupied by the 2 electron paired each, and the transition can take place from the occupied orbitals to the unoccupied ones, that is HOMO to LUMO, highest occupied molecular orbital to lowest unoccupied molecular orbital. So now this will be subject to the selection rule, of course, again. So the length of the polyene chain to be taken is a matter of controversy. It cannot be the distance between two end of the carbon atoms. You cannot take, because if you see over here, this is not a straight chain. If you go on adding, this will not add up as a bond length. Now if you look at it, this is inside the plane, this is outside the plane. So basically what I mean by this is, if you consider the two end of carbon atoms, because this would mean that the wave function is 0 at this particular carbon atoms. What I mean is, if you try to find out the distance, we have to take the wave function which goes to 0 at the boundaries. So it appears that the adding one bond length to each side gives the best correspondence with the wave function which is obtained by the Huckel molecular orbital. So we need to add one bond on each side. So if you take the example, says for example, each bond length is taken as average of carbon-carbon single bond, okay? And if you see C double bond C is of say 140 picometers. If I take one of the example of polyene is hexatriene. So if you look at here, this is an example of hexatriene. So if you take this hexatriene example, there are 6 carbon atoms. If you see now, these all 6 carbon atoms, they are in conjugation, and there are 5 bonds basically. If you see over here, isn't it? There are 5 bonds. So we add one bond on each side and making the number of bonds as 7. Okay, so therefore the bond length is 7 into 140, that is 980 picometers. So 6 electrons occupy the first 3 energy levels, so that the longest wavelength transition is n is equal to 3 to n is equal to 4. We can see here. So in general, say for polyene having n atoms in conjugation, the highest occupied molecular orbital, that is k, if we say it is n by 2, so the longest wavelength is k to k plus 1, and therefore it has the energy which is given by this particular expression. This we have already seen. There is nothing new in it. And of course, from this, the wavelength of the longest wavelength transition is given by this particular expression, that delta E is equal to hc upon lambda, and therefore lambda can be found out using this particular expression. Now applying this to the hexatriene problem and inserting the various quantities, we obtain that the wavelength lambda comes out to be 452 nanometers, whereas the observed value is 258 nanometers. I mean, this is the contradiction. Clearly, some of our assumptions are incorrect. That means in particular this case. So therefore, what is observed is the polyene chain is not linear. This is clearly proved over here, but it is zigzag of this kind, as we observed for butadiene, and this reduces the length of the chain. In fact, adding half adding half a bond length on each side of this particular bond instead of one, it will decrease the length of the box, and it will that way bring the calculated value from say higher one, that is what we have obtained is basically 452 nanometers, and it will come down this way to 333 nanometers. This is somewhat in consonance with the experiments. Even now, this is not in agreement with the experiment, and this is not too satisfactory, but then still it has come down to a certain extent. So the free electron model, that way if you see, it tries to explain the effect of conjugation, because the increasing conjugation increases the length of the box, and the wavelength is proportional to L. You can see here from equation number 10. However, both the length of the box and the state, that is 2k plus 1, depend on the length of the carbon chain, of course. And therefore, in conclusion, if I want to say about the free electron theory, we can say that the free electron model correlates the relation between the length of the particular bonds, or the length of the molecule, and it predicts the correct effect of increasing the conjugation of the transition wavelength. But at the same time, it is not quantitatively correct. It has got certain limitations. So this is what is particularly the use of free electron model in calculation of wavelength of molecule in case of polyenes. That's it, friend. This is the end of this discussion of electronic spectroscopy. Thank you.